When I heard that there was going to be a Backrooms movie, I was definitely skeptical. It just seems like whenever there's a film adaptation of a new media phenomena or properties, it rarely goes well. And with the Backrooms specifically, I was curious how that would work. How would the adaptation of the Backrooms and the liminal space aesthetic convey to film? I was of the opinion that what works about the format of, say, a YouTube video or a video game or a simple image is that it's not constrained by the narrative parameters that a film is, or more specifically, a major mainstream film. Film can obviously step into the abstract. But now having seen The Backrooms, I have to say I was pleasantly surprised. The film is beautifully shot, the atmosphere is genuinely creepy, and the performances from all of the actors are great, but especially the two leads, Chiwetel Ejiofor and Renata Rensfe. So yes, the film has a lot going for it, but for me personally, it tapped into something that I've been thinking about for a while now, which is the nature of nostalgia and the place of nostalgia in horror.
Remember those sweet, warm New England summers? Remember sipping lemonade underneath a shady tree? Remember when you hit that pedestrian with your car at the crosswalk and then just drove away? Pepperidge Farm remembers.
So when I'm talking about nostalgia in horror, I mean specifically the popularity of horror content that is reminiscent of the pre-2000s. It seems to me that I've been noticing this is a trend in a lot of horror content. I would say over the last 10 or 15 years, and a lot of this content is particularly interested in the bastardization of children's media. I think the preeminent example would have to be the Five Nights at Freddy's games. Initially released in 2014, the survival point-and-click game of course became a massive success. For those of you who may be unfamiliar, in the game you are a night security employee at a family pizzeria whose animatronics come to life at night, and you observe them through the restaurant's CCTV system, and you have to close the doors to your office before they get you. This admittedly simple setup was exceedingly effective, and there have since been a whole media franchise that developed out of the first game, including 7 sequel or prequel games and 2 major Hollywood films that have made a combined box office of over $500 million. The series is, of course, playing on a number of typical horror tropes, the uncanny valley of objects that are close to being human, but not quite, and this is a well-documented phenomena in psychology, but it is a phenomena that we can only really speculate about. There are a couple of theories about why the uncanny valley occurs, but from what I understand, we're still far from knowing why this phenomena occurs. In Sigmund Freud's essay The Uncanny, he posits that the uneasiness we feel around lifelike objects may be due to a now lost association with childhood. His essay continues to examine how the uncanny is related to something that somehow feels familiar to us, the German for uncanny being translated as unheimlich, or unhomely. In Five Nights at Freddy's, the uncanniness of these creatures stems from the contradiction of them supposedly being inanimate objects for the customer's children to project their imagination onto, while at night they actually exhibit a real animate existence. That and they fucking kill you. And Five Nights at Freddy's was also responsible for the popularity of a whole plethora of what has been coined mascot horror, with examples including Poppy's Playtime, Garden of Banban, Indigo Park, and Joyville. All of these games tap into that bastardization of children's media or entertainment into something with genuine malice. Mascot horror is somehow familiar to us as we've grown up with similar creatures. Although in Ireland, the animatronic restaurant was never really a big thing, but, we knew of things like Chuck E. Cheese and the Hall of Presidents from American media. But we did have TV shows with people in big colourful costumes like Barney and the Teletubbies, and specifically in Ireland, the Morbegs.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
And this genre of children's entertainment leads me to my next example of nostalgic horror. On July 29th, 2011, the first episode of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared premiered on YouTube. The web series would go on to become a cult phenomena and even eventually receive a syndicated TV spin off for Channel 4. The series follows the misadventures of three characters, Yellow Guy, Duck, and Red Guy, who appear much like the characters that we would see in many children's TV programs of the 90s and 2000s, actors in big costumes. In each episode, the characters meet an anthropomorphic object that teaches them about a human concept through sing-song.
What's your favorite idea? Mine is being creative.
However, in each of these episodes, the song slowly begins to unravel with the boundaries of what we would expect from a piece of children's entertainment and dissolves into these horrifying experiences for the main characters. And as the series progresses, the characters themselves begin to be killed off one by one. What is strikingly apparent in this series is that from the beginning, in episode 1, there is a 360 pan of the characters at the table, and as we turn, we see through the fourth wall onto the set of a studio, acknowledging the canon that this is a TV show, and we, the audience, are reminded as such. Like Five Nights at Freddy's, Don't Hug Me is taking children's media and entertainment and deliberately distorting it. Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared ran for 6 episodes on YouTube with a combined viewership of over 270 million views. I remember the first time I heard about Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, it was from a friend of mine one day when a bunch of us were hanging out during the summer, and I just remember being blown away because I had never seen anything like that. And I do wonder if it could have laid the groundwork for things like Adult Swim's Too Many Cooks, which aired in 2014, and video games like Amanda the Adventurer, whereby this previous era of entertainment is looked back through the lens of horror. And on the topic of creepy things I was interested in when I was 17, does anyone remember dark theories about children's TV shows?
Pepperidge Farm remembers.
Like, guys, I read this theory that all of the Rugrats are actually dead. And then I read this other thing where Ed, and Eddie are actually dead. And then I read this other thing where, Kalu? Bad news. He's dead. Okay, so not all of these dark theories were about them just being dead, but I do remember being fascinated by these theories, and I would search for videos on YouTube for the newest theories. But why? What was it exactly that I found so fascinating? Why did Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared grip me and millions of others? Why did Five Nights at Freddy's strike such a chord? Well, I'm sure it's obvious from the setup I made in this video that I'm going to say nostalgia. But nostalgia in horror seems somewhat contradictory, doesn't it? When we're feeling nostalgic, we are often experiencing positive feelings about what it is we're remembering. So, why is there so much media that looks back to this era of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s without fondness and instead usurps the fondness we might feel with dread, terror, and creepiness? And this trend seems to be continuing, particularly in video games, and one source of this continuing popularity is, of course, the backrooms. The backrooms as a concept branched off from the liminal space phenomena that cropped up online in the 2010s, concurrent with FNAF, Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, dark theories about children's media and TV shows, and it would seem to me that this phenomena is a symptom of internet culture's expression of a nostalgia that we are experiencing for the pre-social media age. There are several reasons for this 90s revival. Those who are coming of age in the early 2020s were born in the 90s, and it's the last period before smartphones became ubiquitous, before social media, before digital cameras, before everything that makes life in the 21st century what it is. This quote was taken from Agnes Arnold Forster's book, Nostalgia, A History of a Dangerous Emotion, which traces the beginning of nostalgia as a medical condition in the 1600s through to the first half of the 20th century with the advent of political revolutions, pogroms, the world wars, and the Holocaust displacing millions of people throughout Europe. And the term refugee was coined by the League of Nations in the 1920s following the Armenian Genocide. Many thinkers, including Freud and psychologist Nander Fodor, looked upon nostalgia with a degree of suspicion, since nationalistic nostalgia is arguably symptomatic of the regimes that forced them to flee their homes. But in the latter half of the 20th century, nostalgia became something more benign and, importantly, marketable.
Remember making toast in a gizmo like this? Maybe you remember Grandma toasting homemade raisin bread loaded with plump raisins, swirled with cinnamon, that sweet aroma wafting through the kitchen. Pepperidge Farm remembers.
It does become apparent from reading this book that this current wave of nostalgia is really not unique at all to culture generally. But even to horror itself, nostalgia has arguably been at the root of its beginning as a literary genre. In my videos on Frankenstein and Dracula and their adaptations to film, I talked a bit about the beginning of Gothic literature and how it was something of a reaction to the changes that were happening in the world at the time. The very first work of fiction to call itself a Gothic story, Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto, added that label to its second edition in 1765 and simultaneously explained it with a second preface that theoretically defined what this new mixed mode was and remains, an attempt to blend the two kinds of romance, the ancient and the modern, by interspersing the imagination and improbability of medieval, supernatural, and ugh, I was doing so well. By interspersing the imagination and improbability of medieval, supernatural, and chivalric tales with elements of the then rising novel. So, since Horace Walpole, Bram Stoker, and other early horror writers were responding to the changing, industrializing world with tales of the ancient and supernatural, it would appear, in my opinion, that the 2010s has seen its own response to a world that has seen enormous changes in technology, communication, information consumption, and the effects of late stage capitalism by looking back to an era where things were different. As I said a few moments ago, the liminal space phenomena that would branch out into what the Backrooms has now become began life online in the 2010s. Look at this graph. This is the Google search trend for the phrase liminal space. And we can see that from the late 2010s, there has been a steady rise of the term even further back between 2015 and 2020, before a huge spike from 2020 with a peak in 2022, undoubtedly due to the popularity of Ken Parsons' YouTube video, The Backrooms Found Footage, published January 7th, 2022. A Google Trends search for the term the backrooms shows a very similar trajectory coinciding with Parsons' video, although notably without the rising trends prior to 2022, with both terms reaching an all-time high right now with the release of the film. So I think it would be pretty fair to say that Ken Parsons is responsible for bringing a enormous popularity to what had been a rather niche corner of creepypasta and 4chan.
Oh, who is this 4chan?
But what was it about liminal spaces that had such a profound grip on online imagination? These images are usually urban or man-made spaces, and they are totally void of other human beings. And I think that this is something that is fairly familiar to many of us when we consider the effects of the 2008 recession on urban settings, for example, the shopping center or shopping mall. I would suggest that these images conjure a yearning for a time when we were younger, when these spaces were buzzing with life, whereas now the desolation of commerce has replaced the desolation of the Victorian mansion, which we would usually associate with older horror stories. And I guess this is my hypothesis I want to posit, that this trend of nostalgic horror of the 2010s has been a response to the economic desolation of lives for the younger generations who are now struggling to survive. And as a response, we may be looking back on a period in our lives when these struggles were not on our shoulders. And this nostalgia expresses itself in horror with this retroactive corruption of those childhood memories and associations. But here's the thing about nostalgia: were the good old days really that good? What were the 90s like for, say, gay people? For trans people, for people of color, for people who weren't actually in a good financial position? A common thread of Arnold Foster's book is that nostalgia can be blinding to the reality of what the period in question was actually like for everybody. In 1974, Otto L. Bettman published a book called The Good Old Days. They were terrible. The good old days, wrote Bettman, were good for but the privileged few. For the average farmer or laborer, though, life was an unremitting hardship. Bettman was unsparing in his account of what the Golden Age was really like for most people. What we have forgotten are the hunger of the unemployed, crime, corruption, the desire of the aged, the insane, and the crippled. Children living in poverty roamed the streets of New York in the 1880s, forced to adopt the wily instincts of stray cats to survive. They slept in boxes and barrels, scraped and begged, and were forced to resort to sex work and crime. This was supposed to be a gilded age, a golden era of rapid economic growth and industrialization, gorgeous frocks and fabulous parties. But for Bettman, it was a period that offered a haunting reminder of how much progress had been made and how much better life had become. So while TV shows like Stranger Things, That 70s Show, and The Goldbergs may offer a somewhat rose-tinted version of the period they are portraying, nostalgia horror would arguably take those rose-tinted glasses, smash them, and slowly torture you with the shards. Nostalgia horror rejects that comforting illusion and instead puts you, the viewer, in the same sense of unease that we feel about today. And in this weird roundabout way, it distracts you from the horrors of now with imagining horrors of the then. And this brings me to the film adaptation of The Backrooms. I think the film echoes the trend of nostalgia horror with its setting in 1990, similar to Parsons' original YouTube video that is set in the 90s and its main character is capturing what is happening with a camcorder. And I would argue that the film's two main characters, Mary and Clark, offer contrasting reactions to their life circumstances. When we are first introduced to her, Mary is processing her trauma as her childhood home is being torn down, and she actually decides to hold on to a talisman of that time in her life, a piece of the driveway pavement that she and her mother made handprints in when the cement was wet. Assuming due to the advert behind her, her childhood home is being torn down to make modern residential condos. For many, the advent of modern living is a catalyst for a nostalgic feeling, but it is questionable whether Mary feels nostalgic as she accepts that her mother was very unwell, and this inhibits her from having positive associations with her home. Mary is not nostalgic. Whereas Clark is suffering from a bad period in his life as we are introduced to him. In his therapy session, we learn that he hates his job, but he does it in order to pay the bills. He may have issues with alcohol, and his wife has kicked him out of his home. Now, while Clark never vocalizes a yearning for a past that he is nostalgic for, it is apparent that he desires for something more from his life. He wishes that he could be an architect, and we see him sitting in his empty furniture store drawing designs for a modernist-looking building. It is at this low point in his life that he discovers the backrooms, and he metaphorically regresses into the mind's trappings of nostalgia, recreating the home he has lost with the humanoid simulacra that have been conjured up in the backrooms. And when he makes this decision to stay trapped, that is when the monster, which has taken on this really creepy simulacra guise of Clark himself, turns on Clark and kills him before chasing Mary into a fight in the Backrooms version of the furniture store. In a moment when it seems like the monster will kill Mary, she manages to survive by fending it off by taking out that piece of pavement rock and bashing it into the monster's face.
Good old rock. Nothing beats that.
Mary survives by rejecting the supposedly comforting pull that has consumed Clark with the talisman that is a reminder of the difficulties of her past. Within the context of the film, the Backrooms becomes a metaphor for the mental landscape. Clark posits that everything in the Backrooms is conjured up by people remembering places, objects, and people. The humanoid simulacra that inhabit the Backrooms are the misshapen fusion of many people remembering the same person. And what I really love about that concept, it was like these are the negatives of Plato's forms. Instead of a perfect form of someone, in the Backrooms, they become the distorted amalgamation of many people's memories. What I love about that concept in the context of considering nostalgia is the tragedy of memory. The tragedy of memory is that we know memory is fallible, and yet we know that we will all become memories, as Mary does herself in the Backrooms at the end of the film. And yet memory is all that we have, all that we are, and no matter how much nostalgics may yearn for this imagined perfect past, that's never really what the past was like for everybody. We may even be willing to overlook how the past treated us for the sake of moments where we would have been blissfully ignorant of what we know now. We may look back on those childhood games with fondness and wish to recapture that freedom, but adulthood seeped in and caused this sense of the uncanny around those childhood objects. We may yearn for that sense of the familiar, but we find something uneasy about those stories we were told as children with the hindsight of what life will actually be like. And I think that is why nostalgia horror has been so successful in many instances. There is something uneasy about that sense of the familiar that now feels unfamiliar, unhomely, unheimlich, uncanny. But I'd be very curious to know what you think about the topics I've been exploring in this video. Do you think nostalgia is a key component of the uncanny? Do you think the success of FNAF, Don't Hug Me I'm Scared, or The Backrooms has to do with something other than nostalgia? Do you think I'm full of shit? Well, if so, do feel free to let me know about it in the comments below. Just don't be a dick about it. And I hope to be back again with another video very soon.